So multiplication over addition, movement over stagnation. If the Pentagon sees something that they're going to unleash for the mission of the American government, then why isn't the church seeing things in people to go, man, I'm going to unleash you for the advancement of the gospel? Every person in their church ought to have to wrestle with whether or not they are called to plant a church. Well, I do think there is some discipleship that happens on Sunday mornings, but it's not enough. Hence why no one is making disciples.
All right. So I've got Brandon Hembree with me today. Brandon, go ahead and introduce me to yourself. Tell me a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then we're going to get right into the discussion around discipleship in the context of church.
I love it. I love it. Well, Alex, thanks for having me on, and super excited about what God's doing through you, through your ministry. My name is Brandon. I'm a pastor, lead pastor and church planter of Impact Church in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Before moving here a couple of years ago, we started Impact Church in Fairfax County, Virginia. And the desire of our heart is to see the Washington, D.C. area saturated with gospel-centered churches through a disciple-making movement. So that's what we want to see. And that's what I'm up to.
All right, so give me kind of the background around your church experience, church history, where you guys have been, where you're at now.
Yeah, so in 2012, we started Impact Church in Fairfax County, Virginia. The goal, the vision ultimately was to start a church that would start other churches. And I was hearing a lot about church planting. It was starting to become a really big thing. In fact, there really wasn't a whole lot written on it. So when I didn't know much about it, the only thing out there really was Tim Keller's church planting manual. So I printed that out and kind of read through that and was learning how to do it. Well, one of the things that I captured is that if we really just fulfill the Great Commission, then we will start churches. The goal wasn't church planting. The goal was to make disciples. But the disciples, when they heard the Great Commission, they clearly heard church planting, because that's what happened, whether they meant for that to happen or not. As they shared the gospel and they made disciples, they had a church. And then we see how they structure and organize that in the New Testament. So we wanted to see that. We wanted to see, can that happen in the Washington, D.C. area in today's world? And so we made a commitment early on. We are not going to grow the church with a bunch of transfer growth. So we closed our doors a lot. The question was, are you called to be a part of this vision and this movement? If not, don't come just because you like our Sunday morning service or because you like me or whatever. And so it grew slow. It grew a lot slower than people would like, because the focus was make disciples. We did that through a community group structure, where our community groups were like little house churches that met. And the thought was, we planted during a presidential election twice now. The first time was President Obama in 2012. And, there's always the sky is falling, especially in the evangelical community during election time. And so there was a little bit of that going on.
Some new prophecy is going around. Some apocalyptic thing.
This is going to be it. This is going to be it. This is it. And so we said, what we need to do, we felt like God say, was plant a church that would survive if it ever became unpopular to be a Christian. So if we can no longer meet in big buildings and we can no longer do church the way we currently do it because of persecution, then what would church need to look like? And that drove all of our methods. So it went a lot slower, but in God's grace, we looked around after about 5 years of doing it and saw a healthy, growing, disciple-making church where the majority of the people had been newly baptized and were new to following Jesus, multi-ethnic from like almost 20 different countries and language groups represented in the church. So it
wasn't like all white people at your church in Northern Virginia.
No, because you can't. Like, you run out of people.
You can, but it would be a very sad reality.
It
doesn't look like the community.
It does not represent the community. In Fairfax County, the most diverse county in the country, right? So, and where we were meeting at was very diverse. So we knew, but that was always our heartbeat, to reach the nations. That's one of the reasons why DC is the nations are
And
here.
I say that people listen like, what the heck?
Yeah.
We're in Fredericksburg,
Yeah.
and there's churches that just look all white, and Fredericksburg
Yeah.
does not look all white.
Yeah. So we can talk about that. So to fast forward, when we started Impact Church in Fredericksburg,
Yeah.
the goal was always to make disciples that will start groups that will start groups that will start churches that will start churches. And we had not seen that churches that start churches part of our vision yet.
Okay.
Well, in the middle of the pandemic, we did.
Yeah.
And God said, now is the time.
Cool.
And so in 2020, we looked and we saw Fredericksburg. Well, that's the opposite direction of Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Still the D.C. metro area, but opposite direction from where I wanted to go. But this is where the people are.
Yep.
Like everyone was moving, especially during the pandemic. But even before that, everyone was coming to Fredericksburg.
Yep.
So if you're going to be a missionary, you want to go where the people are, right?
Sure.
So that's what we did. Came to Fredericksburg. I'll never forget. I was talking with someone from a leader in another church, and they just said, Brandon, like, I know your heart is to reach the nations. I don't think you're going to be happy in Fredericksburg. Like, why would you leave Fairfax County if you want to reach the nations? And I said, well, aren't the nations in Fredericksburg too? And they said, gosh, no, no, you need to stay in Fairfax. And that would become a theme of like churches who have been around for a while. And I say this not despairingly at all towards any of them.
But there's a real state of the church, which we could get into.
Yeah.
But this was impacting you first as perspective.
Yeah. Because I'm like, what are we going to do? So my wife and I got in the car, and my wife is maybe even more passionate about this than I am.
Okay.
And Ellen says, we can't move here. And to be honest, it wasn't going to take much to dissuade me from Fredericksburg because I wasn't super pumped in the first place.
You can't move here?
Yeah, she said, we can't move here.
And why did she say that?
Because the leader of the church said the nations aren't here.
Yeah. And he was just like, there's no need for a church plant.
Exactly. Yeah. We don't need new churches in general.
Yeah.
But also, I know your heart.
Yeah.
They had supported our church in Fairfax County.
Okay.
So he was like, I know you. I know your heart.
Yeah.
You don't want to be here because the nations are not here. Well, we had our 3 kids with us.
Yep.
We said, why don't we find a park somewhere and let them run some energy out so they'll sleep when we get back on 95 to go back up north.
Yeah.
So we pull into this park called Old Mill Park.
Yeah.
And we get out, and Alex, we're the only white people in the park. Oh my gosh, they were everywhere. Yep. Like it was amazing. Yep. And not just one nation, but like many different nations doing all sorts of different things, flooding this park. And that's when I realized that Fredericksburg had changed.
Yeah.
But a lot of people didn't know it yet. Kind of like when your house smells a little bit, but you live there, so you don't notice until someone comes in and says, what's that smell? You're like, I don't know, it's my house.
Yeah.
And that's the way Fredericksburg kind of was, I feel like. And so God just confirmed in that moment. He was like, no, the nations are here.
And not that in Fredericksburg was a bad thing happening.
No, not at all.
People were they don't see it. They're unaware of there is a change happening.
Yeah.
And actually it's a beautiful thing happening in Fredericksburg that the people were coming here.
Yes.
Missed opportunity.
Yes.
By the church, because I think they're just so busy doing
church. Yeah. And that's the thing too. If I'm not careful, in a few years, that'll be me too. I'll still be ministering to the Fredericksburg of 2021.
Yeah. It's like the propensity of church to get so fixated back on church.
Yeah.
Yeah. We missed the mission.
Yeah, exactly. So we moved here, and then in God's grace, in the middle of a pandemic, we this time was a little different because we were sent out with a team from the church we had started. And so things went a little bit quicker this time as far as being able to make more disciples.
So the church you planted sent you guys out to plant this church.
Exactly.
And you came with a small team from that church?
Exactly. About 8 of us.
Yeah.
So not, 30, 40, 50, but 8 of us.
And you how did that go? You leaving the church that you planted to this church? Like, did you hire a new pastor that you found in the network, or?
Yeah. So
I know I baited that question.
Yeah. So no, one of our philosophies, and this is different for everyone, so that's why I say it's our philosophy,
Yeah.
is let's raise up leaders from within. So
Yeah.
we had just spent 8 years planting this church, making disciples and developing leaders.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that made it to where I could go be the one that was sent is because we had a backlog of leaders.
Yeah.
So many leaders we were running out of things because we weren't a big church.
What do you mean? Like so many people with seminary, like
No.
master degrees?
No, we have leadership development as part of our discipleship process. Okay. So we just believe every Christian is going to be a leader.
So like guys working for the government, guys doing
Yeah.
landscaping.
Yeah.
Like you're just raising them up as leaders.
Oh yeah, absolutely. These guys all have other jobs, construction workers.
So like they're just like they're greeters.
Yeah.
At the church.
Yeah.
Or like what all does this
Well,
look
first they're not even Christians.
Okay.
They are just people in relationship.
Okay.
And when you're starting a church, one of the questions I ask is, who could be the next pastor? Well, I think a lot of the workers for the harvest come from the harvest.
Yeah.
And so we're not looking in the harvest. We're just going, we don't have enough nursery workers. We don't have enough this or that. Well, there's a lot of people out there. So it just starts with that. And I go, man, our future leaders are these people.
Yeah.
So let's watch God save them. Let's watch them raise them up. Watch them be baptized, discipled, just like the Great Commission.
Yep.
And then let's be intentional. We need community group leaders.
Yep.
We need leaders that are going to host people in their
not
home.
Just greeters, but actual, like you're getting them.
Yeah. Give them. Yeah. Because somebody let me plant my first church when I was 26 years old.
Yep.
I had no business doing that, but God called me to, and people took a chance on it. And so I just use that to take chances on other people. It doesn't always pan out.
What does that look like, taking a chance? Like, because I think some churches really struggle with, like, outside of like the deacons who like help pass around the plates.
Yeah.
You know, the pastor does all the preaching. So like, let's say pastor's listening to you. They know this is where they need to go. In a sound bite, like what does that look like, going from like just your deacons passing the plates to like creating, even having this mindset of raising up leaders and giving them room to run. So, you know, a net to fail kind of thing.
Well, I just started a group.
Yeah.
And said, hey, I'm going to invite you guys to come and to learn leadership.
Okay.
So, you know, I invited probably 10 or 12 people. They would come to the basement of our townhouse. I would feed them dinner.
Yep.
And then we'd go down to the basement. We'd open up God's word. We started in the book of 1 Timothy and just fled through and said, what does New Testament biblical church leadership look like?
Yeah.
And we started on their character and their heart. And we'd spent 6 months, a year just on character, and said, man, we got to make sure you're the right person before you have leadership. So we focused on that, did real discipleship. From there, I got overwhelmed. There was so much to do, right? Because as you're making disciples, now there's more people. Now there's shepherding. Now there's preaching every Sunday. Now there's figuring out a website. Now there's who's going to run the social media, who's taking care of the nursery, who is going to be the greeter, and who's going to find the greeters, and who's going to schedule the greeters. So what I did is kind of corny, Alex, but I got a bunch of paper plates. And I just wrote down every single thing I did.
Yeah.
Everything from the preaching to the disciple making to the working on WordPress on the website.
You're like true church planner. You're having to do everything.
I'm doing everything. Well, me and my wife are doing. I mean, she's really doing a lot of it.
This before she listened.
No, I'm just saying, just in case, you know. But so I just wrote it all down. I left nothing back. Yeah. I didn't go, I don't think there's anybody else who could preach at our church, so I'm not going to write that one down. Yeah. I just wrote down every single thing that I was currently doing, knowing that 5 years from now, I didn't want to be doing all of these things. Yeah. I could not sustain that.
Yeah.
And then I sat down in that group of people that I'd been training for the last 12 months.
Yeah.
And I put all the plates out on the floor. And I said, I need you guys to take some things off my plate.
Yeah.
And I said, I want you to look around and see some things that you're gifted at, that you would get excited about, that you could do to serve in this way. And within 60 seconds, every plate was taken off the floor. Okay. And then I said, great. So now let's talk about what this looks like. Yeah. And we put some accountability structures into place. And, and one of the things was overseeing people who are serving. Yeah. So it was like, so now you're going to come talk to Alex about some of those things before you just come talk to me first. And that was really the start of giving away leadership. So that takes us back to when it was time to plant a church. Yeah. We had all these capable leaders.
Yeah.
They had been given real life experience to lead, to preach, to do anything.
Wow.
We call Impact a laboratory for leaders.
Okay.
Come experiment. You're not going to mess it up more than I have.
Yep.
Like, you're just not.
Yeah, I think people underestimate, even like as a lead pastor, if you are coaching and people know you're coaching and mentoring new leaders, and a new leader makes a mistake from the platform, how graciously you can get back up there and clean up a small mistake. As long as people understand the value of like you're making disciples.
That's it. And everybody has to preach their first sermon. You know,
I did.
I did. It wasn't pretty.
Yeah.
You know, and but when you're able to do that under someone who's discipling you,
yeah,
it's almost like having a safety net.
Yep.
You know, because you're not going to be there forever holding their hand.
Yeah.
But while you can, do it so they get their reps and they get their confidence and they can teach others to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
So we had this guy serving as an elder at our church. And I think it's important to know we weren't a big church. Like, people think you got to be a big church to start another church.
I haven't even talked about sizes, but I mean, it does impact. I mean, there's a lot. The bigger the church, the more responsibilities. There is those different dynamics. We get too caught up on attendance sizes.
Yeah.
But attendance sometimes does impact. Like it talks about scale, responsibility, the burden.
Yeah.
And there's those factors and attributes nonetheless. Yeah.
No, it just, everything intensifies.
Yeah.
So we're always praying for more people
because
we think that'll lighten the load. And in some ways it does. And then you just get other problems.
Yeah.
But we were a church of 75, 80 people.
Yeah.
When we decided to multiply the church.
Yeah.
So everyone's always looking for what's the magic number to multiply. And I don't think there's a magic number. It's when do you have capable leaders?
So like on that thought process though, like some people would just be thinking of like 80 people, like you just need a bigger building.
Oh, right.
Bigger service, more services. Why didn't you go that route?
One thing we say that I stole from someone, and I would totally give them credit if I knew who it was. But kingdom over castles.
Yeah.
So multiplication over addition.
Yeah.
Movement over stagnation. And so I'm not here for anyone to know my name. I'm not here for anyone to know Impact's name. I don't even care if the churches we start are called Impact Church.
Yeah.
Our goal is literally to saturate DC with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we think we can do that best through making disciples that start churches.
Yeah. So very counter church culture perspective when it comes to growth. And so I think there's still a mindset kind of like the build bigger buildings, bigger services, build your brand, enterprise. They would never call it enterprise. That's a hard vision to go up against.
It is, it goes against everything.
It does.
And
it's predominant, you get on YouTube.
Yeah. Oh, I know. And around the world.
Yeah.
People want to,
they're modeling what they see us.
People want to do that. And every time we go somewhere, I'm like, no, don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's like one reason outside of like Kingdom instead of Castles, like what do you see as the detriment of that?
The gospel doesn't move, doesn't go anywhere. I call it obese Christianity, where we just have people that sit in seats and they get fed and they get fed and they get fed and they get fed their whole lives. And 40 years goes by and they never did anything for the gospel. And now they're so big, on getting fed that they can't move.
Yeah.
They don't even know what that would look like.
Yeah.
And so the detriment is what we're living through right now.
Yeah.
Which is the fact that the churches are dying at an alarming pace.
Yeah.
That the average age for a senior pastor is like in the mid 50s now.
57.
In America. So we're not raising up young pastors. Yeah. We don't have a bench. Churches are dying. Even though we're planting more churches than ever, we're not getting close to keeping up. Yeah. So we are living right now the fruit of the way we've always done things.
Yeah.
And so when I look at the New Testament, I just don't see it.
Yeah.
And so I guess the willingness to be foolish enough to say, the first time someone comes to your church and says, we love your preaching, we love the worship, we love everything, and you're thinking, man, I just scored this, they're going to stick around. And they say, but tell me more about this planting churches thing. And you go, yeah, we're going to give you everything you need when the time is right. And God says, we're going to raise you up and ask you to be a part of sending out a team and starting a brand new church and then rebuilding this one with new disciples. And then they never come back.
Which is like, to me, that's like, heck yeah, finally. But but that's so like, there's so much friction against consumer Christianity in that.
Well,
because
yeah,
we're asking you to engage, not attend.
right. It's the same way when we're talking about planting a church versus starting a worship service, right?
Yeah.
Most people think planting a church, you start a worship service.
Yeah.
And that's what we typically do. We say, I'm going to plant a church, I'm going to go start a worship service, and then I'm going to start doing some outreach events. And then a few people in our church who really are passionate will start making disciples.
Yeah.
But we got to flip it, right? So
Yeah.
let's start making disciples. Then as we do that, let's send them out on mission to reach out to the city. And then let's start a worship service as we've made disciples so they can gather and worship together.
What would you say, like, I mean, you just spelled out the state of the church. And you can go down the list of stats. We won't do it, but like the state of the church is pretty dire. There are growing churches. A lot of growing churches are as a result of transference, which you mentioned. You know, that's a driving factor at big growing churches.
Yeah.
What about the pastors out there who like they recognize this, and they're like they just don't like they're not in a network that has the vision or the creativity to figure out what to do differently. Like, what would you recommend? What would you say to that person listening? Like, where do they even begin if they have a heart to try something different but they don't know how?
I think the biggest thing is knowing that this is going to take a lot of guts, because, and really the biblical word is faith. But it's going to take a lot to step out and do this.
Yeah.
And it's going to take more time than you think. It's going to be a little bit slower, probably.
Yeah.
And it's not going to meet all of your expectations. And I think it was John Piper that said this, but I took it from someone. But being a church that lukewarm consumers don't want to come to. Now, obviously, we're not trying to push anyone away, right? The gospel is powerful enough to save lukewarm or consumers.
But growth isn't the goal.
But growth is not the goal. We're not trying.
Attendance-wise.
No, we're not trying to get more people.
Yeah.
Because what happened after 2020 is we saw no increase in baptisms, but we saw some churches declining and other churches experiencing the most growth than ever.
I
What
led
doesn't
all
take
the marketing in our church.
Yeah.
And we freaking dominated because of SEO,
Yeah.
Facebook ads.
Yeah.
And I was leading all the guest integration classes, and everybody I talked to were just from another church.
Yeah.
And they were mad at that church,
Yep.
disappointed, whatever.
Yep.
And they were looking for the new brightest thing, and they found us online. And,
Yep.
and the growth for a moment was like, finally,
Yeah.
it was really exciting.
Yeah.
And then it hit me that like, this isn't kingdom growth at all.
No. And the worst part is, and I just would encourage other pastors as well, is like, don't blame that on God. Like, and maybe I shouldn't say blame, but don't give God the credit for that.
Okay.
Like,
yeah,
because a lot of times that's what we want to do. Oh, God's doing a big thing at Impact Church.
So you're following the marketing formula.
Right. I'm like, no, hey, tell us, how did that happen? How did you overnight go from having 50 people in your church to 200 people in your church? And now it's like taking off like the super momentum. And we're tempted to say, well, just God. I mean, seriously, I have no idea how that happened. Well, most of the time you do. You know exactly how it happened.
Which it's we're trying to give credit to anything that is good.
Yes.
But in this church world, not everything that is good is God anymore.
Right. And none of that. And I'm just saying, be authentic.
Yeah.
Like if you did that because you were running a bunch of Facebook ads or Google stuff or whatever, and they came and they weren't churched previously and now they're coming, praise God for that.
That's a game changer. But I don't know of any, because I went deep down the church marketing path for a while. I don't know of any churches that are truly, maybe a little bit, but they're the outliers doing different things. When it comes to churches that are truly growing, is they're reaching unchurched people far from God, and then they give their lives to Jesus, and now they're becoming disciples and make disciples. Like that's not like the churches you hear about that are growing.
Right. Well, it's not quick. It's not easy.
Yeah.
It's not sexy. Like it's going to take time and effort and sweat and trust in Jesus.
Yeah.
So why would you want to do that when, especially you've got all this other stuff where you go, man, we've got to get people for our nursery volunteers, and we've got a budget to maintain, and we've got a staff to pay, and you've got all these external factors that are driving your mission rather than the Great Commission.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me about some of the let's talk about some of the obstacles that you guys came across in planting. And it could be obstacles from other churches, obstacles in relationships, but shifting. I mean, I think some of that I bring up because it's just sad, because I think I've talked with you, and I think I don't think people realize how much the church is not in unity.
Yeah.
Of just like encouraging one another to get out there and see other churches plant churches, whether they're in the same, network or whether they're in a different one. Or even beyond that, more importantly, like that just shouldn't be the place. But like, then there's the, like, how do you go in somewhere missionally and work through the cultural nuances that are obstacles?
Yeah.
So you take that where you want, but
yeah, lots of obstacles. You read the book of Acts, though, you're encouraged. You go, yes. Anytime the gospel is advancing, it's met with resistance.
Yeah.
And so you take that as what it is. A lot of spiritual warfare.
Yep.
Also, just a lot of dumb stuff. Like when we moved to Fredericksburg, I was talking to a business owner, and was just talking to her, asking, and I had no clue who she was or anything. I was new to the area, and I just said, "Hey, do you think Fredericksburg needs a new church?" And she said, "Gosh, no, we don't need a new church. Like, are you kidding me? We have churches all over this place." And she's like, "And I'm a Christian, but we don't need a new church." And I was thinking to myself, we need another antique shop, I guess, but not another church,
And we do have a lot of churches around town.
We have a lot of church buildings.
Yep.
We do. We do.
Which is important, like, because people, I think, have that mindset. Like, they drive by a church, throughout, like, every few miles, they see, little brick Baptist church.
Yeah, not every steeple is a gospel-centered church.
Or thriving or healthy or one that, would you feel comfortable sending your friend there who doesn't know
fill
Jesus?
in the blank. You got it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So there was that obstacle. But actually, now that I've been here a couple of years, I agree with her.
Okay.
I don't think Fredericksburg needs another new church. I think it needs about 50 new churches.
Okay.
And so I'm not even opposed to our church planting another church somewhere else in the Fredericksburg area.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're going to reach people who don't understand it.
What is the misunderstanding there?
Well, part is what you said, is they see a lot of buildings.
Yeah.
The other part is if you've been here longer than 10 years in the Fredericksburg area, then you think it's still little old Fredericksburg. You're not
immersed in your church network. You don't even realize how
you don't even know.
Don't know Jesus around you anymore.
Exactly.
All you do is church, probably.
Exactly. You don't even know. And if your pastor doesn't tell you on Sunday, then you have no idea. And so there's a lot of that, and just blissful ignorance, like not, nothing harmful or bad, just ignorant as to what's going on. And so, I think just trying to get people to see that we don't need another church. We need a bunch of new churches. And that's just the Fredericksburg area.
Yeah.
Like, let's not, I mean, we can talk about any other area in Northern Virginia or DC that you want to. Like, we have a desperate need for more churches. But I also think the definition of church is an obstacle.
I think that's what I was thinking about why you say that.
Yeah.
It's people's definition.
Yeah, because most of the time people think church, they think church service.
Yeah.
And they don't see, like, no, this is a gospel-centered community of people who've been saved by Jesus, who are called out and living on mission to make more disciples of Jesus.
Yeah.
And that can look many different ways.
Yeah.
But it rarely looks like just gathering on Sundays to a building for a worship service.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the more and more I try to think of churches like this is a missions team.
Right.
Should be. I don't think many churches look and feel like missions teams, but it's like, what if it did feel more like a team? Because so many people, if the whole church has been there for 30 years and everybody knows each other, like, it's like, that's not church, but like that's a community.
Yes.
But it's plateaued in its missional purpose and focus, and now it's just become so insular and about the next Sunday for themselves. But if you did think of church more as like a missions team, and here's my team, like, we're going to worship, we're going to pray, but like, we're going to continue to learn how to follow Jesus. We're going to get in the word, but like the why is not to do that. It's for the mission.
Yeah.
And it's like the more teams, the better.
Right.
Doing mission.
And I would say that's one of the reasons why when we started both of our impact churches, the worship service was the last thing we did.
Yeah.
Like, we had already started making disciples. We already had a strategy to reach out to the city.
Yeah.
We were already meeting in homes. We had already multiplied community groups.
Yeah.
And we're still did not have a Sunday morning worship service. And so finally, when we had enough community groups that it felt like people were missing each other throughout the week and really wanted even more of that community,
Yeah.
then we added a worship service to say, and they also went to the temple daily to see
Right.
one another, to worship the Lord.
Yeah.
And so that became another part. But when you read Acts 2:42 through 47, I see going to the temple daily, that weekly worship service was just 10%
Yeah.
of what the church did.
Yeah.
So we actually tell our community groups, you are a little church inside of a little church.
Yeah. We've flipped it though. Like that now is the dominant focus of energy, productivity, planning, staff meetings,
Everything.
budget. And we got Victor in the room. You guys can't see Victor, but like, I think there's a whole generation coming up who are just going to look at it and be like, are we about the mission or are we about the service?
Yeah. Well, think about it too in raising up leaders, what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
If I have a leader that comes to me, I mean, especially in a Northern Virginia context,
Yeah.
we got people who are leading at the Pentagon.
Yep.
Okay. Like holding the deepest secrets of our national security, entrusted with incredible leadership.
Yeah.
And they come to us and say, how can I serve? And we tell them we really could use your help in the parking ministry. Okay. And that's great.
I feel like laughing is so abrasive. I will explain why I laugh in a minute. But I have thoughts too.
But it's great.
Yeah.
We need that. Yeah. Okay. But like, why aren't we if the Pentagon sees something that they're going to unleash for the mission of the American government, then why isn't the church seeing things in people to go, man, I'm going to unleash you for the advancement of the gospel?
Yeah. No, it's a missing invitation. Because we're like high control, low invitation instead of low control, high invitation.
Yep.
And it's like I realize now, having been the connections lead and setting up all the teams and greeters and following some of the big training churches in their team development, and chart org, like one of the saddest things is to see high capacity leaders who go from greeter to a lead of greeters, and maybe that's over the course of 5 years, 10 years, but never actually became a disciple maker.
A disciple maker,
because we don't celebrate disciple makers. We celebrate really good volunteers.
Exactly. So that they can uphold the Sunday morning experience.
And it's just like, like you have business leaders who can somehow manage teams, do seven figures, do tons of revenue, build amazing things. They can run crews. And at church, they're lucky if they become the lead greeter. Like there's something so backwards. Like if you can build a business, like you could probably be a church planner.
Yeah.
We just need to help you learn how to like hear God's voice and follow and know him and work on character. But like you clearly have some leadership potential and maybe even apostolic gifting. But people really like, they just, I don't know. It's there's.
Yeah. Well, a good friend of mine, he passed away last year in a plane crash, Clint Clifton. He trained and mentored me in church planting and disciple making. And one of the things he says at his church was every person in their church ought to have to wrestle with whether or not they are called to plant a church.
Yeah.
Because God may say no, or not right now, or that's not what I have for you. I have something else for you. But the wrestling through that of what is God's mission.
Yeah. And when your definition of church is so rigid that it has to be a big building with multiple services with all the production, that's going to feel really intimidating. But if you go back to your definition of church earlier, then it's like, why, well, that's a much easier invitation.
Right. And you talk about obstacles. We don't have a church building, you know, and in Northern Virginia, that's a big obstacle.
Yeah.
Because I think my generation, I'm in a weird phase, Alex, and you are too, probably, in that I think things are changing.
Yeah,
I do.
Yeah.
I don't know that we'll see the fulfillment of that. I hope so. But I see like people 10 years younger than us, right? People like Victor over here in their mid-20s. They're not going to settle for being the lead parking attendant of Impact Church.
But I feel like we as leaders, we rob them of opportunity. By doing that, and that's my big concern with big church is like, we do it out of 10 and with excellence, and we continue to pursue how do we do it better and better and better, but it ends up all being a handful of the best professional leaders who use their gifts, where the majority of the church are not using their gifts. And the average person, like, you know, you think about the parable of the talents.
Yeah.
Everybody's responsible for when they stand before Jesus, how they use their talents. My concern is that we as pastors, have we not even, you know, did we just use our talents, you know, in a almost selfish way for the sake of the kingdom, because this is our mindset, but I just think we're off course. It's mission drift, and these other people, like, they have the talents. They just aren't being invited to use them. And there's not room for that in the big setting when everything has to be perfect either. I mean, there's so much to that, I think.
Yeah. Well, that was actually really kind of you, Alex, because I don't think we're just off course. Like, I think it's much more dire. And that's one thing I appreciate about your ministry is you're helping ring the bell and say, hey guys, we need to pay attention to this in this generation, in this moment.
It's nice to hear that, because sometimes I feel like I'm the, like, nobody wants to hear.
Well, yeah, nobody wanted to hear from Ezekiel. Like Ezekiel rolls into town, they're like, oh crap, you know? And so not calling you, equating you to Ezekiel, but so we need that. We need that
but
in
it's
the
hard
church.
to go, like, people love what they get on Sunday. And if you've been doing the same thing for 20 years, to say it's no longer working when it seems to be working and feels good for them, you know, it depends on what their definition of working is, but like, that's what we're like going up against.
Well, Alex, how much of it do you think is pastors needing to feel needed? Like, gosh, if I don't make it about the Sunday morning experience, will my people think I don't do anything throughout the week? Or will I even be needed anymore?
I think it's that. I also think that there's also a segment of pastors where it's like they can't afford to not be needed.
Yeah.
Because everything's been built around what they, you know, the engine. And if you don't fuel the engine, they won't be able to retire because they have no plan B.
Yeah.
I mean, I know from presbyters, there's a lot of other, there's pastors and churches out there that people think love it, but like they no longer have vision. They no longer have passion. They are there until they can afford to retire.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
People do not know that.
Well, Lifeway put out a stat. This is a little old, so it might be even worse now.
Yeah.
But their stat was that 40% of pastors, if they could do anything else, they would do it.
Yeah.
That if they felt like they had the skill set or were hireable,
yeah,
or had the capability to do anything else, 4 out of 10 of your pastors would not show up to church on Sunday.
Yeah.
Because they had gotten another job outside of ministry.
Hey, friend, we're going to jump right back into this discussion about discipleship and disciple making. But before we jump in, let me just highlight ordinarymovement.com, because that is the reason that I have been able to provide this podcast in the first place. There's this whole community and a movement of disciple making where we've basically taken this entire process of discipleship. We've distilled it into a group model, taking people through 26 sessions. We have a men's track, a women's track, and we have a track that can fit in just for men and women together. It fits into church structures with small groups. It also fits into a person's daily life, where even if they've never even been in a small group and their churches don't have small groups, they don't even know where to begin. It is for the local church and meant to be done with and through your local church, but it is also designed for ordinary men and ordinary women. And it was designed by ordinary men and ordinary women. And so anyone, be a roofer, an entrepreneur, a business person, a stay-at-home mom, a waiter, whatever level of education you have or don't have, it doesn't matter. We've taken all the guesswork out of how do you bring together people and learn how to follow Jesus together in a high challenge, high grace environment that helps people become disciples and make disciples. And it's all available to you. Check it out at ordinarymovement.com. All right, back to the show.
All right, let's talk about groups.
Okay.
Because you guys do groups. We do groups. Ours are different than y'all's were, but same goal, same mission, you know, discipleship. I recently saw a pastor sharing how they're not into groups. So, which is like, you know, it was one of those, and I think there's some areas we can get into of like, are all groups effective? But like, sure. Tell me your thought process on groups, because a lot of churches are still focused on just trying to get Sunday morning right, or they're just content with Sunday morning. You clearly see the value in groups. Can you break that down?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to say burn it down.
Burn what down?
Sunday mornings.
Okay.
But
you guys do Sunday morning.
We do Sunday mornings.
Yeah.
but it needs to be drastically rethought. And
Okay.
what I mean by that is, what is driving the vehicle? And so for us, we would say we call them community groups.
Yeah.
We would say that those are the discipleship process
Okay.
of Impact Church. So when someone's like, how do you make disciples? Where does that happen? How do I get discipled? How do I grow? It's all our community groups is how that happens.
But some would say that happens on Sunday morning when the pastor.
Well, I
gets to
do
work.
think there is some discipleship that happens on Sunday mornings.
Yeah.
But it's not enough.
Yeah.
Hence why no one is making disciples. And so
Yeah.
I think Sunday mornings are good for fellowship. I think Sunday mornings are good.
You think they're good for fellowship?
I think they can be. You can at least see each other, you know.
It does go a long way to actually see somebody.
I think
don't
so.
See them,
and
it does feel also like it's
to your point too.
Depth.
I mean, you know, if you're a church of 100 people versus a church of 1,000 people,
yeah.
that may be different, right? Yeah. So I think there's some positives there.
Yeah. And I say that, like, I think groups help bring a next level of depth.
Yes,
and fellowship.
Yes. But I actually don't think the service should be the front door.
Yeah.
I think groups should be the front door. I think the service should just be something that is added on to our discipleship, to our, you know, worship of the Lord.
So a lot of times we hear like, hey, invite your friends to church. That's like the predominant. You're saying that you don't think that's the best strategy.
No, I think it's the strategy. I just disagree on what church is.
Okay.
I think church is the group.
Okay.
I don't think church is the Sunday morning worship service.
And I think for listeners, like, you guys still do, I would say, like, traditional church in my context of like, y'all are still doing Sunday morning service.
Yes.
Okay. So it's not like you're just doing house church.
No.
You've stopped doing traditional church on Sunday mornings.
No,
like,
no,
you guys do church on Sunday mornings.
Yeah. And we did house church during COVID for 4 months in Fairfax County.
Yeah.
And we doubled in size, our church, and with those who were being baptized, and it allowed us to multiply the church in the middle of a pandemic.
Okay.
So I'm very pro that. But yes, we did go back to a more traditional with a Sunday morning. I'm just saying the Sunday morning thing doesn't drive us.
Yeah.
We look at, if we're going to look at numbers, we look at how many are engaged in community groups.
Yeah.
So when someone asks me,
I think is beautiful.
Yeah. When someone asks me how big is your church, that's the number I give them. I'm not giving them Sunday morning because I don't know what Sunday morning is.
I think if someone's listening, like, why give a number for community groups? It's like, well, if you believe that you're going to get better discipleship, better fellowship, better growth, better accountability, better opportunity for everybody to engage, to participate, more leaders to lead, more people being able to reach their neighbors and having a softer entry point for neighbors and friends, then if groups provide that, then that is a much more indicative measurement of maybe discipleship than attendance on a Sunday morning.
But see, you're measuring healthy things. And a lot of times as a pastor, I can be tempted to measure the wrong metrics.
Yeah.
Because maybe that's not what my network wants to hear. You know,
Yeah.
Well, guys, I'm discipling 4 people right now, and they're so close, you know, to going all in for Jesus.
Yeah.
They want to know, well, how many are coming on Sundays? What's your this? What's your that?
It's attendance and giving.
Yeah, exactly. So it is I get the temptation.
Yeah.
Just saying, like, what if we measured the right things, all the things you just listed, which I think are much easier to quantify in a community group setting.
What are some other things that you would measure if you were trying to reevaluate discipleship growth?
Gospel conversations. Who's talking about Jesus?
Okay.
Like, and we divide that into partial conversations, complete conversations, and the ask.
Okay.
Which is, did you ask someone if they would like to follow Jesus?
So it's not like, doesn't necessarily have to be all in one.
No, very rarely.
You're helping people have like a framework.
Exactly. To let them know the win.
Yeah.
The win was faithfulness. The win wasn't you sat down and shared with someone for 20 minutes and they gave their life to Jesus right there.
So just like did they have an uptick in being missional?
That's a sign for us.
Okay.
Are you having gospel conversations?
Okay.
Are you inviting people to your community group, your coworkers, your neighbors? That is a sign for us of health. And then we ask this question regularly: who are you discipling, and who is discipling you?
Yeah.
And we share with people that's not a taboo question.
Yeah.
Like, that's not a weird question. In fact, we want it to be very normal at Impact for someone to come up randomly and say, I've just been watching you a little bit. I know we don't know each other super well,
Yeah.
but you're a few steps ahead of me, it seems like.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to disciple me?
There is, I think, in church, like a taboo feeling of like, oh, if I'm being discipled, I must be weak.
Something must be wrong.
But I think if people are listening, like if you're a business owner and you're making, whatever, and somebody else is to come alongside of you and say, hey, I've been where you are and I tripled and now I'm retired and I can tell you how to do it. Like, why would you not want to be mentored?
I'd grab coffee with them.
Yeah. And then let alone, like, how are you giving back?
Right.
And that's, I think, the mindset we need to have around this, like, who are you discipling? Who's discipling you? It's like, why would anybody not want growth in our lives?
Yep.
Spiritually.
Yeah. And I think that's the key, right? Is you're actually measuring spiritual growth.
Yeah.
The fruit.
So maybe numbers of groups, but that feels a little at surface level, but like it's a way.
Right.
Number of new group leaders.
Developing leaders, because that's making disciples too. Is leadership development.
Yeah. And by that, there's also a like, because I've noticed a lot of groups struggle to emphasize raising up new leaders.
Yeah.
They kind of do the same thing that we've done in churches for so many years of like, they're just happy to meet together and the same leader does all the leading.
Yeah. So maybe let's talk about that for a second, because you know how in church, Alex, we can say the same word, but mean totally different things.
Yeah.
And I wonder if small groups aren't that way too.
Yeah. We just had this conversation as a team. I'd love to hear.
Yeah. And so I know that sometimes I invite people to our group and they go, oh, I've been a part of a small group before.
Yeah.
And I ask them to tell me about it. What they really mean is a Bible study.
Yeah.
They showed up to something, they watched a video, someone asked 6 questions, and then they prayed and went home.
Yeah.
There was actually no real discipleship happening, or it was all fellowship. Yeah, that's my underwater basket weaving small group, and we get together and do swimming and basket weaving.
They're just hanging out with friends.
They're just hanging out, and then maybe they open up in prayer.
Yeah.
And so I think, like, when we say community group, we're talking Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47. We're talking about they devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings, to the prayers, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread. Okay. They met in homes. Like, that's, so when someone asks us, like, Acts 2, 42 through 47, we just put a bullet list together and say, to us, that is what a community group is.
So your value of discipleship and disciple making and mission and fellowship, all of those ingredients and values are within the community group itself. The community group is not just the extension of that. It's all part of this bigger mechanism and full circle discipleship. And those things are happening within them.
Exactly. I think if you were to come to one of our community groups, and all of our groups are the same, by the way, they're multi-generational, multi-ethnic. Okay. We don't stick, the young adults in one group or the parents with kids in another group.
Yeah.
We're all together. You can pick based on location or time.
Yeah.
I think if you walked into one and they all do the same thing, when you're starting a group, they study something a little bit different. It's more discipleship heavy, teaching them how to make disciples.
Yeah.
But once you get rolling, like, they're all doing the same things. I think you would see a better, more beautiful picture of the church Jesus died for walking into one of those houses and seeing that group than you would if you walked in on Sunday mornings to our church.
To your church.
I think so.
So and I say that because someone listening, you're not just pointing your finger at it. Like, you're saying, like, you're a church planner who's planted a church that meets on Sunday mornings.
Yeah.
But this is your heart and conviction around discipleship.
Yeah. And can I be honest? I mean, I honestly, one of the reasons that we're still doing a Sunday morning service is for the culture.
Yeah. Are you ready yet to go that hard against the current?
Exactly. And so I'm not saying that when we start our next church a year or two from now, right. Yeah. When we start our next church a year or two from now, I'm not saying they're going to do it exactly the way we're doing it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying the way we're doing it is 100% right. I know it's not.
Yeah.
But when I look at it, I think the Sunday morning thing is really in part to go, well, we still have a large majority of our culture that equates Sunday mornings with church.
It's still I think for people, it's still a very accessible, kind of like comfortable front door.
But is there a way to not put as much emphasis on that.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to do is say, as a church, let's not put all of our emphasis on the Sun. Like, yes, it's great. It's wonderful. But let's put our emphasis on what God's doing in these community groups.
Yeah. Which, for those listening, maybe as a pastor, you may totally get it if you're not been on, like, staff meetings.
Yeah.
Like some staff meetings, like, 50 to, you have a staff of 5, 12 people.
Yeah.
2 to 3 hour long staff meetings once a week. Do the math behind how much energy and time is put into that. And those staff meetings are totally committed to the Sunday morning service.
So our staff meetings, even though that is an element, the Sunday morning service exists to serve the mission.
Yeah.
Not the other way around. So the Sunday morning service is not the mission for us.
Yeah.
But it exists to serve.
I feel like
the
people
mission.
would say that. Like, I feel like any pastor would say that. But I don't think I think that there's a gap between them saying that and realizing that their Sunday morning service isn't actually helping them really do the mission effectively. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean.
Like, and I don't know if it's just they just don't have vision for what can be done anymore because all they know is Sunday morning service. I don't know.
I would just encourage you to, if you're a pastor and you're listening, to start with your own heart and go, man, is there anything in me? Have I made an idol of the Sunday morning experience? Have I been leading people to burn them out, to uphold the Sunday morning experience when I'm not even convicted by it,
So some of the stuff we've talked about, and even, I don't know, burnout, how much do you think is some of the, what do you think is nuance between urban, inner city, suburbs, and rural in this discussion? How much of this do you think might be nuanced a little bit to varying degrees?
Well, yeah. I mean, you always have to exegete your community that you're in.
So someone listening, if you're in rural Kansas,
yeah,
this conversation's probably, what you take away from this. And I do think the emphasis on better discipleship metrics.
Yeah.
I do think the emphasis on groups.
Yeah.
But I do think it's going to look and feel very differently than how we're doing it in Fredericksburg off the 95 corridor.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Because there may be some areas of our country that are ready.
Yeah.
To say, why don't we get together once a month on Sunday mornings?
Yeah.
And then just focus completely on this.
Yeah.
Especially people who are having to drive 30 minutes or an hour to find a church to go to.
Yeah.
I definitely think, and then you look in some contexts, like if you go into an urban context, we were to go into the middle of downtown DC right now. It's like, would we find a lot of gospel center church? Like sometimes you just have to go where there's something, and so which again is the need to start more gospel center churches.
So let's wrap this up a little bit. Before I maybe end with a question, is there a topic you want to get into that you would want to, I'm speaking, there's pastors gonna be listening that are trying to figure out discipleship, grow in discipleship. They're already crushing at discipleship. They want to do better. And there's pastors that are like, yes, they're for discipleship, but they're on the fence of whether or not is Sunday service really that's okay. They'll get there.
Yeah.
Or the state of the church will, they'll be a statistic.
Yeah.
But anything you want to bring up that you'd love to call attention to?
I don't know. I think, Alex, the one thing that's burning on my heart right now is this, are you doing what you really want to be doing when Jesus comes back? Like when Jesus comes back, is this how you want to be found?
So I think there's some pastors that they're shepherds.
Yeah.
And they're content with taking care of their flock as it is until he returns.
Praise God.
But maybe for that shepherd, it's like, well, could you then acknowledge that it's there's a fivefold ministry?
Yeah.
And there's people out there with other giftings that need to be sent out.
Yeah.
And you can still focus on the flock and shepherding well. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Well, so right now, one of the things, Alex, that I've found, we've got a guy that is going to come do our residency program, start a church.
Yeah.
The church that is sending him has basically said, we love you, we support you, God bless you, but we don't know anything about church planting.
Yeah.
So we're not in. I can't really help you. We bless you. See you later. Good luck.
Yeah.
When I look at that, I go, man, what a missed opportunity to get in on the mission of God, because God was faithful to say, yeah, you don't have a church planting bone, but this guy does.
Yeah.
And through him, you could be fulfilling the Great Commission.
Yeah.
And so I would just say, like, even if you're a pastor, J.D. Greer says this in his book, Gaining by Losing. He says that the worst title in the church is missions pastor, because it creates this idea that there is a specific area of the church that focuses on missions, instead of every pastor is the missions pastor.
Yeah.
And every Christian is a missions Christian, is on mission. So what would it look like, in an example? And Alex, I don't know if you have an example of, like, you see it done well, where there may be a pastor that says, yeah, I don't understand church planting at all, but I'm going to get behind it for the sake of, and I just use church planting, but it could be, anything that is Great Commission central.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you recognize that everybody's going to stand before Jesus, and the goal is for him to say, well done, good and faithful servant, because they use their talents well for the kingdom. I think we just have to, like, wrestle with, like, are people using their talents, or are they all just attending church? And the whole point of the talents was, like, it's not just like, are they kind? Are they meek? Are they generous? Like, this was about, like, his business until he returned. And like, that's analogous with the mission he gave the church, which is to make disciples. And so I think when that clicks, it's like, well, then I need to be seen as everybody in my church engaged in disciple making. And it begins with better discipleship, but better discipleship full circle comes back to disciple making. And that's one of my pet peeves right now in, like, the discipleship talks about spiritual formation, is it's all about kind of growth.
Yeah.
But rarely gets into the challenge of
but have you
making
grown if you're not making disciples?
It's an absent discussion in a lot of the seminary, the people coming out that are kind of pros at spiritual formation.
Well, and I'll say that's great. That may be an area that I could grow into. I try to simplify it for our church. And I say, we live in a transient area, right? People are kind of in and out in Northern Virginia.
Yeah.
I try to just say, if I only have you for 2 or 3 years, I want to teach you to do 3 things. I want to teach you to pray.
Yeah.
I want to teach you to read your Bible.
Yeah.
And I want to teach you how to make another disciple.
Yeah.
And if I can teach you those 3 things, I believe you can grow in your spiritual formation.
Yeah.
And so, but I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
This is something I've been thinking about. There's a danger at a church like Impact that we talk about this a lot.
Yeah.
And you think because you go to a church that talks about it a lot, that you're actually doing it.
I've been thinking about this too. Well, I don't know what you're going to ask, but.
Well, my question is, like, how do we combat that? How do we get our people to go, being a part of a church like that isn't enough. I need to actually be joining in the mission. How do we keep ourselves from falling into that trap?
I think people really need to read the Bible and wrestle with the parable of the talents. I know I've said that, and I maybe I won't say this so many, I sound like a broken record now, but I think when people really realize there's an ownership that we all have to live on mission, and then your church community, the leadership, their responsibility is to, in high challenge and high grace, bring that community into living on mission. And I do think, to your point, I think we're going to see in coming years that churches that want to be healthier talk a lot about discipleship now, where that word was absent, but it doesn't mean that they're actually doing really good discipleship. I think that they're just going to start talking about it.
Right. And that's scary though.
And then people are like, well, my church is about it. So I think maybe the best answer is people need to really, for themselves, don't trust, verify.
Yeah.
Like, learn what is real discipleship based on what Jesus taught us and what we see when we read the Bible, not what others tell us.
And would you say maybe the Great Commission would be a good place to start?
Heck yeah.
To say, okay, what is discipleship?
Yeah.
Well, going, baptizing, making, as in teaching them to obey.
Yep.
So there is a teaching component, but there's also an accountability component of obedience.
Yep.
Would you say that's a good starting point of trust but verify?
Yeah, and if that all sounds foreign, it's just like help people learn how to apply.
Yeah.
How do I apply this to my life? People need help. They need to hear your voice. They need to hear your perspective. They need to hear other takes, other creative expressions on how to follow Jesus in their setting. And we need all of the members of the body at work, not just a few.
Yeah. I was talking to a guy who says he's ready to take a next step. He's going to a big mega church right now. And again, I'm not anti mega church. To me, it's not about that.
Yeah.
But he's going to a big mega church. He's not being challenged. He goes to serve. They literally said, we don't really have anything for you. Just keep coming, be faithful, give, He thinks he's ready to take his next step. And when we read the Great Commission together, he said, I've always just been taught discipleship was teaching. I've never recognized the word obey or, like you said, apply. And so I think that may be the next step, is to say, if I'm just getting teaching, I'm missing part of the mission of God, right?
Yeah. I think there's a passage that's all about like it's a rebuke on those who are always learning but never applying.
And it's in there a couple of times.
Yeah. So I think that's that's what we really have to be measuring and holding accountability is their action as a result of all of this, or is it just 30 years down the line of attending church services on Sundays and being a good Christian that attends and gives and doesn't beat their wife?
Ooh. And you know who that starts with? The pastor. Because if the pastor isn't making disciples.
But this is I'm in agreement, but I really wonder, do pastors think that they are by doing church service? Like, is there just a mindset instilled in them from Bible school that disciple making is Sunday morning preaching?
Okay. So go read the Bible. And, our model is Jesus.
Yeah.
Our example is his word.
Yeah.
That's where we start.
Yeah.
If we were doing things based on my tradition and upbringing, gosh, Impact Church would never make a disciple. I didn't grow up in a church culture of heavy on that. We had what was called discipleship training on Sunday nights.
Yeah.
And it was basically a video, just watch a video for a while.
Yeah.
And so I get it, but my goodness,
it's a whole new world. It's like going to space. I mean, if that was the mindset, now it's there's no ceiling of what discipleship could be if you can get away from the Sunday morning service being discipleship to everyone are disciple makers. How am I helping them engage in mission individually?
Right. Well, and I wonder too, if just to have someone that you can invite along.
Yeah.
What if I took a new believer?
Yeah.
And said, Pastor Smith, this is Alex. Alex is a new believer, and he's going to follow you around for 30 days.
Yeah.
He's going to eat with you. He's going to, everything you do, he's going to be with you 24/7. And he's going to learn how to follow Jesus. What would Alex learn from following Pastor Smith for 30 days about what a Christian does? Would he walk away and go, yeah, I learned you follow Jesus. You really doesn't look much different than anything else. You can, you study a lot. You just sit in a room and study.
Clean. You put out fires.
You check your email a lot. You overwork or you underwork. What would Alex learn about following Jesus if we just started with the pastor?
Well, okay. So on this note, what I found over the last years is as people wanted to go into ministry and really trying to figure out what it is they wanted, people felt like they need their average ordinary, they want to, it's they've been involved in small groups. Now they want to be effective in ministry. What I found is they feel like they need to then be on staff.
Yeah.
They need the title pastor. And then, this is Lord have mercy. They feel like they have to, get a college degree.
Yeah.
To be able to be on staff, to earn the title pastor, which means that they're going to disappear for who knows how many years.
Yeah.
And learn a ton of theology, but no actual implementation, and come back and think now they've earned that role to be effective. And they still know as much as they did as before about actual disciple making. And then I'm trying to help them get that. But then it's well, what do you think? I would ask people what do you think I do?
Yeah.
They're they're thinking that I'm doing disciple making activity all day, every day. And I was breaking down to them how much admin, correspondence, spreadsheets, planning, organizing, putting out fires, meetings, thinking about events and programs. And I'm like, is that what you were thinking about in ministry? And they were like, no.
Yeah. Because the disciple making movement doesn't rest on the back of a church staff.
Yeah.
Like I tell our staff all the time, your job is to free up the distractions of our church so they can be all about making disciples of Jesus.
Yeah.
So we take on distractions to free them up of distractions so they can be all about making disciples of Jesus. And if you just read your Bible in Ephesians 4, this whole thing got started on the backs of ordinary, untrained, common, uneducated men. But they had been with Jesus.
Yep.
And so I think, to me, that's equipping our people to know, no, you're going to be the ones that make the most disciples.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
My job is just to equip you
Yeah.
and to remove as many distractions from your plate as possible.
It's good. It's good.
Yeah.
Thanks for hanging out.
Good stuff, man.
All right. If you have questions with Brandon, you want to learn about his church planning process, maybe you want to ask him about disciple making, I have all of his contact information in the description. And if you are looking for a discipleship platform to bring small groups to your community that really focus on intimacy with Jesus, intentional relationships and multiplication, a full circle discipleship experience, we have Ordinary Movement available for you. So visit our website down below, check out the men's, women's, or co-ed groups that we have available. And if you have any questions, reach out to us. Finally, be sure to subscribe if you want more videos like this, and check out this next video right here for more tips and insights on discipleship.